So, welcome to the Global Corporate Venturing webinar on venture clienting. Is it a path to innovation or a strategic distraction? Venture clienting is a topic that we have heard spoken about a lot at all of our events, all of our one-to-ones that we have with people. This is a topic that is coming up repeatedly. And so we put together a really great panel for you today to talk about kind of really the how it works in reality, not just theory. Um, and we love, obviously, I love webinars where we talk to consultants and people who do venture clienting as a service. They bring a valuable perspective. But I also really love webinars like the one that we have today, where we have real practitioners, all from companies who are implementing this day to day in, day out, actually making it work. And have been doing so for quite some time. So they can really give you some perspective on, what works, where they've had to pivot, what they've doubled down on, and how these programs can really be put in at your company as well. So I hope those listening will be able to pick out some really valuable tips. So I'm just going to introduce the panel here. So Bengt Steinbrecher from Wholesome Maker Ventures, based in Switzerland. Neha Bomia from Maersk Growth, so the shipping company that we all know. And Rocio Sierra from Progresso X, which is the innovation unit of Progresso, based in Guatemala. A wonderful collection of really real world economy companies, right? So we have construction, we have shipping, things, physical things, really old companies. So if you think about Progresso X, 120 plus years. I think Wholesome is also, and Maersk equally venerable. And so they, it's really the work of bringing innovation into companies like this, which is challenging. But I think it's fair to say that our three panelists are doing so with some success, which is why we brought them to you to share their insights. So starting just to kind of introduce venture clienting a little bit. So this is what we saw in our annual survey. So about 49% of companies that have, some corporate venture activity will be doing venture clienting. So nearly half. And it's that number has been inching up. It does seem to be a tool. So what we're talking about with venture clienting, for anybody who's not familiar with it, is when a corporation becomes a very early partner to a startup, doesn't take equity in it, but will then work usually through a fairly defined program to kind of partner early and build, pilots and then scale those up from there. But we'll hear much more about what it means in each particular instance. But just to set the terms, and one of the reasons that we think that venture clienting has seen such strong growth is because again we see what the strategic priorities are for companies, obviously shifting each year. And there's sort of roughly, four buckets sort of supporting, Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, and then financial returns. And just where they are in relation to each other in terms of importance does kind of shuffle a little bit. I think more recently we have seen a shift to companies wanting to focus much more on supporting the existing business, so Horizon 1 type activities, things that have a little bit of a quicker payoff. And that's where venture clienting, is really powerful, because you can move straight into that pilot project without sort of, investing in something for years before it's even ready for actually really engaging in that way. And so just to introduce the panel before we dive in, so yes, so Rocio is at Progresso X, was just created about 8 years ago. She works on the execution side, so she's really hands-on with taking things to pilots and then through the pilot into the scale-up phase. And then Progresso also does have some capacity to invest in startups. That's been added later. So it's definitely a kind of clienting first, and then with capacity to invest. So an interesting model. So Bengt at Maker Ventures, that's about 9 years that it's been running. And, again, it's not a never invest, but definitely a sort of look at, clienting first, pilots first. And what I was really impressed with, and Ben can tell us a little bit more, is just the kind of volume of pilots that, you've come to run through this program. So just being able to really do this at scale was, I think, something that we could all learn from. And then Neha at Maersk. So Maersk, I think, is a really interesting case because it's really evolved its innovation strategy through many stages. So that there was a stage where the focus was very much on taking equity investment. Then there was a sort of dual strategy doing that plus venture clienting. And then most recently, we've seen news where venture clienting really does take front and center stage because that seems to be, producing the results really that are needed. And I think what we're really looking forward to hearing from you, Neha, is really kind of how that focus has evolved. And I think, what we were talking about as we were preparing for this session was really how you've kind of brought a real laser focus into those particular relationships that are most likely to be able to kind of go ahead and bring value to the company. So that selection process, I think, is amazing. So without further ado, I'm going to now turn it over to our panel. And so what I'd love to ask from each of you is really if you could kind of introduce yourself, fill in anything that I have neglected to add that's crucial, but also just tell us a little bit about your program. Why was it that this venture clienting approach came to be the one that you focused on, and maybe just a few brief words about kind of how it works, how you take things through. Now, won't go in any particular order. Rocio, you are first in the way that I see you on my screen. So why don't we start with you?
Okay, hello everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Rocio, and as I just said, I'm representing Progreso X. Progreso X is a company that was created about 7 years ago to help a much bigger construction company, one that's more than 125 years old. So you can understand how this traditional company works. We work with mainly two business models. The first is the value creation side, where we work with venture clienting, open innovation, and we collaborate with the entire ecosystem. And as she said, we also work in the investment alternatives side of things. We have an area named PX Ventures, and we can invest in both corporate venture capital funds and in strategic startups. So about our program overall, we were born in a moment that we realized that the company needed like a fresh start and ideas to collaborate with global experts. We knew that we didn't have all the capabilities needed to do that ourselves. So we understood that the world was moving like way faster than us, and that they were like this whole spectrum of technologies, like really great ones. And we have still struggling with the digitalization side of things, different than the other colleagues here. Guatemala is like, and the industry is way smaller than the other ones. So we started deeply understanding what the clients need, both internal clients in the business units and also external clients of this construction materials company. And from there, we started searching for technologies that could help solve the problems we understood we had. So since the beginning, we have learned a lot, and we have been focused on solutions that are like replicable, scalable, and sustainable, validating the fit within the company, working via pilot projects. It's been fun, and we work mainly in three areas: productivity and efficiency, construction systems, and sustainability. And we have this framework that goes from the scouting phase, where we identify challenges and technologies. We make a match, then we move to the pilot project, where we test the solution in the lowest possible cost and scope. Then we move to the go-to market, where we make things work in a bit more formal way. And lastly, we scale the solution up, and we give it back little by little to the business unit to continue the relationship. So that's on my side.
Okay, great. Fantastic groundwork. And one thing to mention also was, I mean, this being in Guatemala, I mean, I think one of the rationales was also that there perhaps isn't a huge startup ecosystem on your doorstep. So you do have to get a little bit more creative and a little bit more flexible with kind of how you find those partners, right?
Yeah, and but we're seeing more and more the ecosystem moving forward, not just in Guatemala, but also in Latin America. So of course we look for startups globally, but Latin America has something to offer as well.
Yep, yep, yep. And you can become sort of part of the catalyst for that, I think,
Yeah.
if everything goes well. So moving on to Bengt, what about you? If you can you give us the sort of, what was the sort of reasoning for sort of Maker Ventures taking the venture clienting first approach, and how does it work?
Yeah, thank you, Maya. Welcome to everybody. Yeah, I mean, we started at a similar time, probably in 2018, and I think it was a time where there already a lot of kind of tech companies demonstrated that collaboration with startups can work quite well. I think there have been different experiences. And so we asked ourselves again, as a large global construction material, construction solution business, how can we capitalize on that? And actually, kind of a very, very first experience that I had was when I went to the Slush conference in 2018. And people asked me, "Oh, okay, Bengt, so Maker, where are you coming from? What industry?" And I said, "Construction material." And they looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" Right. So, I mean, that gave me one signal that apparently somehow this startup ecosystem did maybe not have the construction industry on their radar, which might be a challenge. And then the second thing was we looked at a little bit what did other corporates do in terms of startup collaboration, and it was already a time where you heard the expressions about startup innovation theater and kind of startup safaris. And when we have presented to our management, we would like to work together with startups, it was very clear we want to create a vehicle where we are creating impact for the business. And we said we are not creating impact for the business by just knowing what is out there and going on the safari, or by kind of putting some uh, chips onto some companies by investing in them, but really by testing their technology and starting to use and adopt it in the organization. That was kind of the starting point of our venture clienting journey.
Yep, and we can get into kind of the way that it built up. But what you've done a huge number of pilots, I think, so far in the 9 years already, right?
Yeah, we started to scale up quite quickly. I mean, at the peak time, I would say we have started a pilot every second week. And but by now that must have been like roughly 200 pilots or so. I mean, we not always had the same level, but yes, and we
Yeah.
learned that. And we can go into detail there more later on. But if you think about innovation centrally, then you are limited by resources and projects. But if you think about a decentralized organization, which is active globally, you actually can also decentralize innovation, and you can run pilot projects in Colombia, in the Philippines, in Germany, in parallel on similar topics, and you actually can leverage the resources that you have.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's a tremendous number of hands-on learnings. So we'll double click on that soon. But bringing in Neha, can you tell us a little bit about the Maersk journey, and how it kind of evolved, where venture clienting became, really seen as the key focus for kind of pushing innovation forward?
Course, and thank you so much, Maya, for already the introduction, and welcome everyone else. It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure to be here, part of this webinar. So, before I jump into Maersk growth, for anyone who may not be familiar, I'll introduce Maersk too with a few lines. So, Maersk is not just a shipping company; we are essentially a global integrator of container logistics. And what that means is that you can think about avocado on your toast this morning. So, it probably started its journey in Mexico or Peru, or where Roche is sitting. It traveled by truck, ship, maybe even air, passed through ports, warehouses, customs, and eventually made it to your local store. And if you ordered it online, we are part of that journey too. So that is what MERS does today. We connect and simplify the global trade. We manage the entire journey from origin to destination. And why did I tell you about it? Because when you're operating at that scale, innovation is not nice to have, it's almost survival. And what a coincidence that Moz Growth also started in 2018, same as what Venkat was mentioning. It was a response to our global strategy to become an integrator. So we started investing in supply chain tech because we wanted to really accelerate on the technology pace of how the startups were building supply chain solutions. In 2020, decarbonization was becoming super important. Everyone was talking about sustainability. It was becoming a global phenomenon in itself. And that is when we also started investing in decarb related startup. In about 2022, we started seeing that we needed to accelerate further. Like we were investing in pre-seed and seed round startups, which were not mature enough to serve the size at which Maersk was operating at. And therefore, we thought about why don't we partner with startups who are who are more mature. And that is how the whole venture clienting concept started back in 2022. In 2023, the big change happened. So Merz Growth used to be an individual entity before, and in 2023, Merz Growth was then brought closer to the business function. So what we do at Merz Growth today sits right at the intersection of startups and the businesses. Our focus is very simple. We identify the challenges or opportunities that we see at Maersk. We connect them to the startups who are solving the real problems. We validate them very fast in our operations, and we scale what actually works. Focus area, we primarily work across our operations and areas like supply chain visibility, optimization, product innovation, operational efficiencies, and digitalization. So basically, where we see both the strategic urgency and the real pain on the ground. And one thing which is very important is, and how we have evolved, is that venture clienting is no longer a side activity for us. It's embedded into the business strategy, and that's the reason that we sit in the strategy function as well. So we just don't ask, like, is this a cool startup that we should work with? We actually ask that, is it tied to our strategic priority? Will it create meaningful impact for us? Is the business ready to actually adopt it if it works? And that shift has made a huge difference in how seriously the organization engages with what we do today.
Okay, I think there's going to be a lot to unpick there, and I think one of the things that will be good to focus on is really how you dive into a little bit of like exactly how you identify those real business needs. And I can see that there's already some really good questions coming in. So please do use the Q&A function if you want to ask a question. What we'll do is we'll once we get a few more questions, we'll switch over to doing those. So please, if you, as we're talking, do kind of put those in. We will try to get to as many of those as we can. What I'd like to do now, though, before we go into the really gritty detail, is just to build a little bit of a picture of kind of how you guys work. So what might be useful is actually to talk about a case study and of something where you've actually had a project with a startup that then went on to have some impact, and I think you all had some ideas on that. So again, why don't we'll mix it up a bit. I might start with you, Bengt, and then go to Rocio, and then to you, Neha, and we'll but if Bengt, I think you mentioned company called Nanolike, I think, that you worked with. So maybe if you could tell us like sort of how that project evolved.
Yeah, so you have to think about kind of a concrete batch plant. So these are the plants which are filling the concrete trucks that you see on the street, right? And typically, if you are driving by one of those, you see that there are big silos where we store kind of the material in there and the cement in there. These are like 15 to 25 meter high silos. Now, the fun thing about it is if you ask the plant manager, how much cement do you have in your silo? In many of the cases, they actually have to climb up a ladder, throw down a rope, like Columbus did when he measured the depth of the sea, right? When going by boat, and see how much cement is in that silo. Now, this was somehow raised as a pain point because you say, well, I mean, first of all, it's not efficient. Secondly, I mean, climbing up 20-meter silos twice per day, there is also some safety risk involved. And we were looking for a solution helping to solve that. And we found there a startup which produced a strain sensor which you could put on one of the legs of the silo, measuring the fill level. Now, what we have done is, first of all, we said, where are we going to test this? We found Greece as kind of a pilot country, which said that they want to test it in 2 or 3 concrete plants. And what did we test? We test on one side, how easy is it to apply such a solution, right? Is that kind of something which you can install within a couple of minutes, or is that actually a retrofit which doesn't work at all? And then how accurate is it? These were, let's say, kind of the 2 main KPIs which we have measured for a pilot for the pilot scope. And I mean, this was done successfully and was then kind of the foundation where now the group said, okay, we would like to roll this out across our footprint. Good success case from it being that now it is live in more than 10 countries, from Mexico to Morocco to across Europe. We have installed more than 1,000 of those sensors. So good case from piloting to scale up. One maybe additional point to that on how this is driving innovation is it's not just about kind of the technology and this accuracy and kind of the initial use case where we said it's about the safety hazard that we would like to avoid. Now, all of a sudden, we had real-time data about inventory levels, which was now creating a business case for the logistics function that they could better time the loading and unloading of the trucks. All of a sudden, there was a new business case quantifying a cost impact. And actually, further evolving, we start to install these sensors also at our customers' silos. So we always know how much the customer has in terms of cement, and we can sell that and offer this as a service for them as well. So it was a nice case to show how these innovations also have kind of a change management and a transformative impact.
And so was it a case that initially there was it had a kind of it generated some concrete savings, but then actually it just created this new business as well. So there was kind of additional, revenue that you could also put against this as a benefit.
Exactly, and also how you internally somehow manage the ownership, right, and the stakeholders. At the beginning, it's maybe more with a plant management safety level. Then all of a sudden, you have kind of the head of group logistics who says, "Hey, that's interesting. I take ownership." And then you start to pitch it to your commercial teams and say, "Hey, why don't you see also the value there?" So.
And one question I always have about these, but how quickly did it then, once you had proven that it worked in Greece and it was successful, how did you then kind of sell it to the rest of the group?
Yeah. I would say that this journey has been now, in the meantime, now something like maybe 4 years. But I mean, the pilot typically in that case, that took something like maybe 4 to 6 months. With them maybe within the same year, within 12 months, first next countries to test it. What in this case helped also to speed up potentially a little bit is at one point in time we said, hey, this is interesting. We would like to support the startup, and we invested also in the startup, which creates maybe another lever on how you can accelerate a little bit this adoption process.
Okay, so that'd be interesting. And maybe we can come back to that towards the end when we're talking a little bit about how venture clienting and investment sit together. But because I can see that there are some questions about how those two work together. So we'll come back to that. But maybe I'd love to turn it over to Rocio, because I think you had an interesting one where it was this project, I think you said Condata, which took not just one but sort of 3 technologies that you've been working with and turn those into just something bigger. So tell us how it kind of happened.
Yeah, sure. So we have this big success case from our concrete division. We launched last year a brand that's Condata or Condata, that is the conjunction between concrete and data. And under this brand, we are now selling 3 different technologies that started as pilot projects. So we understood clients' need, because this is for external clients, not business units. And we realized that they needed a big help in digitalization and making their operations more sustainable and efficient. So we started with the scouting phase. We contacted these 3 startups globally, one from Canada, one from Argentina, and the other one from Mexico. So a bit of a mix there. And we started the validation in the pilot project. Each one took about 10 to 12 month because we were working in construction projects. Like we needed some time to validate the technology, and so we understood that clients really appreciated these technologies, and that if we started commercializing, uh, Progreso was about to be seen as an ally to the clients, not just a concrete material supplier or a cement supplier, but also like a big a big partner that comes to technology. So for us, having this public brand has been a big change on the way clients are more effective themselves, because we don't benefit from these technologies. It's just like, okay, we can assume the risk to validate. We, of course, have a lot of uncertainty when it comes to validating these technologies in this region. And clients are like, oh, maybe I don't want to try because that costs a lot of money. And there's like a risk and change management, as Ben said. So we took the risk. We validated with some of the clients. We paid for the pilot projects, and when we saw that they were giving real impact, we were like, okay, this is making sense. We can start commercializing these technologies in the real world. And now we have clients paying for the 3 of them, and we are in the pilot phase for another 2. That maybe if they are successful, we can move to sell to clients. So for us, I think that in Latin America, where digitalization gaps are like really existent and significant, this approach has been really impactful for our clients, because they are gaining insights and data to move things forward in their operation. And in the meanwhile, we Progreso are like this partner for them.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a great case study. How do you measure kind of the benefit that comes to Progresso from it? Because obviously there's this sort of there's the nice halo effect, right? You're helping, and there's the the good feelings about that. But is there also, do you think there's a measurable sort of, you can then win more repeat business or anything like that that's easy to put on a sheet to show your CFO maybe?
Yeah, it's not that easy actually, because since we are not benefiting like financially from the selling of these technologies, we have understood that the main value we can create for Progreso is having these clients happy and seeing like this side of, okay, so Progreso is my ally. I can continue like buying different products, and now they are even raising their hands and be like, oh, if you want to pilot some technology, please use me. I have this job site I want to try. So I think it's like a more momentum thing that maybe a financial impact, that of course there is. We measured it case by case and technology by technology, because each of them helps in some specific thing for our clients. So it's actually quite fun to understand, okay, this is making sense. How can we sustain that this is going to create an impact for the clients and Progreso side? So
Yeah.
basically, it's a whole mix of things, but mainly in this use case is more of the relationship we can maintain with the clients after.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is often the difficulty in these things, is some of the big wins. The big wins are really the intangibles, and but and that doesn't mean, just because they're intangible doesn't mean that they don't exist. It's just that they're really hard to put down on paper. So so no, I think good story. And then Neha, if we come to you, tell me a bit about, I think your example was Carve Me. So what happened and how did that build?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, and really close to my heart as well. So, as I said, that not all POCs are created equal. Some focus on revenue growth through new products, some focus on cost and efficiencies. This one was way different. It was triggered by a new regulation. So, when a new regulation by EU came in, which was called as CBAM, a lot of our customers were simply confused. They didn't know that how to comply with it, what data was actually needed, and where to even start. And that is where our MERS customs consulting team really stepped up. They saw this not as a problem to solve, but rather like as an opportunity to create a new product, which they would call as CBAM consulting services. And that is when Merz Growth stepped in with a very clear problem definition from the business side. We went into the market, looked for the startups who could potentially solve it. The way we designed our POC was very intentional. It was not about just testing the technology. It was actually a desirability and a feasibility test. Will the customers actually value this? Will it make their life easier? And what we can realistically deliver at scale. We selected Carbme as our partner to test this out, and what they brought in was really critical. They enabled structure, reliable visibility, collected the data, emissions data from the supplier, and translated it into something that the customers could report on. And so we were able to move from rough estimates to something which was much more actionable and credible, and something that our customers started loving. And I think that is what made it really successful, that we had a very clear problem. There was a real urgency. There was a strong business ownership. And then we had a very focused definition of success itself.
Yeah. Okay. And what kind of and how did you sort of measure the impact that it then had, all around?
Yeah, so we tested it out with 2 customers, and it was depending on the feedback that we received from them, the operations team who were testing it in our real operations environment. We had defined the KPIs and the success criteria very early on, like what is the service reliability that we should be expecting, how much how much is it easy for the suppliers to fill out the data, because customers also want to keep their suppliers happy. So we had designed it in a way that we were capturing all the success criteria and the KPIs right from the start to make it a real success.
Okay. I think I'm getting some really great questions here, so I thought we could maybe turn to some of these now. And I'm going to try to group them together a little bit, because there's a couple of questions about sort of starting a venture clienting unit. If you're starting from zero and you're really looking to kind of build the case for it, start to look for those first, needs. Where do you start from? And then I also have a kind of question really from me about, the kind of resource that you need when you're first setting up, number of people, what kind of budget should you be looking at doing, so maybe again, if we I don't know, why don't I'll put it over to you, Rocio. What's the sort of what's the process of starting something like this up, and what's the bare minimum that you could kind of begin working with?
Okay, so if you're just starting, I think you need to have like some things ready. First, you need to have this vision from the board that it's like, okay, this is impactful and we need to invest money and people on that resources. So when you have that, I think the most important part is understanding the problem or problems that you're working with. So if you have a clear understanding of what you want to solve, the rest will follow. We started like hearing and understanding all the business units opportunities and our clients as well, and we became like these experts on knowing what they need and why they haven't found the solution yet. So I would focus on that part first, and having all this team ready to be like, oh, I know the opportunity, like I work there. We don't, but we are like experts on that. So when you have that, then you can start creating this scouting phase, whatever you're going to do. And you're like, okay, people, I'm working with these opportunities or problems that I need to solve. Who has a solution that can help me solve this? So then I think you need to have like a strong filter, as we may say. So you're like, okay, what are the criteria we're going to use? Is it maturity level? Is it founders? Whatever works for you. So you can have this clear understanding of, okay, I'm working to solve this problem and I'm getting this funnel of startups coming to me. Like, oh, my solution is the best. Okay. Now we can understand if we really make a match. Where we start evaluating previous use cases or success stories with other clients if they do have it. And then you move to the to the matching phase. So or like, okay, if it's the first time, it's gonna be a bit weird at first because you're working with a corporation. In our case, it's a big corporation, and people are gonna be like, okay, what are we doing? What is this? For us, one of the main things we have been learning on the go is that agile methodologies create us like moving things forward. Since we are like this bridge between the corporation and the startups, we are like, okay, maybe I need you to hurry on this side, and startup, please be patient. We're working that, and I think that's how you start. You move along on the way. You each time have like more and more projects and learnings, because this is a learning way. When we started, it was way different than it is now. So I think the main thing is to just start, to have the approval of the board and be hands-on, and understanding the problem.
And what would you say? Because you said that's quite different from how you started. What do you think? What's maybe sort of one or two things that you're not doing now that maybe you did in the beginning, or
Okay, so we have been doing a few things differently. I think for us, we understood that we needed some maturity level on the startup side. At first, we were like testing with really early on startups, and it was great. But we came to a point that we were like, okay, can we scale this? Maybe not so much for any reason. So I think that's one of the things. Another thing we're doing differently is that the project leader now comes from the business unit. So we have this person that is like an expert on the problem. We're not, and we're clear on that. So this person has like a clear understanding of what they need to solve for them, for the business side. And we give them a lot of ownership. In the beginning, we were like a bit more hands-on, and we still are, but now we respect that line much more. We know that he or she is the expert, and that we can move forward as they need us to. So if we do that, I think the ownership comes naturally if the project is moving forward, because they are the ones saying like, no, this is not working for me. This is not resolving my problem. Or it is. This is gaining traction. I'm liking this. I think this has potential. So that accelerates things on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, that helps on the sell into the business part. That's kind of eliminating that. Bengt, if I turn to you, I mean, same question, but maybe also adding to it this question of how do you sort of, because this was something that came up in the questions that we have of how do you then move at speed, because so like how do you first get started, but then how did you also come to overcome some of those issues that I think people are alluding to in the Q&A, which is that, there's all this drag that big corporations bring in. They've got the legal, they've got the compliance, how did you sort of cut through that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was really kind of the first task in the first 1 to maybe 3 months to create an internal environment to get rid of that. I mean, typically I show here now the slide of the riders of the apocalypse. And I explained then here on the left, you have kind of the legal department, you have the IT team, you have the procurement and so on, right? You need to create somehow an environment where you say, you're talking with the startups at eye level. You're able to sign an NDA quite quickly. You're able to somehow get into a contract for a pilot project very quickly without kind of having issues with the procurement saying, hey, you need now to do a tendering process, where I say, I cannot do a tendering process. And this is the one startup which is delivering this solution, right? So this is really what we did at the beginning, where we said, let's bring those stakeholders on board, explain them what we try to achieve, why we need to deviate from kind of our standard corporate processes on that, and set up documents and structures up for this purpose. Including then maybe also the question, I saw that somewhere, about who is paying for the pilot, right? The objective was really to reduce the hurdles for the business to run pilots with startups.
Yeah.
And then the second dimension was more on how do you get to meaningful problems and pain points that you can address. And what we very consciously focused on, we said we are reaching out to what we call the alliance of the willing. So those people who showed a high appetite of testing something, a pain point that they have in their local business, which they would like to solve, and where we see a chance that maybe there is a technology out there helping them. In many cases, they have not been super strategic or super Horizon 3 and so topics, but really what is bothering the people in the organization. Like what I mentioned before as the example, right? How do I measure how much cement is in this silo? What this helped us was that very early on we have created the buy-in then of those early adopters or the testers who also have a pain point, and if we succeed, we knew they will adopt it. So I think this helped us to get momentum build up quite quickly. It also helped to somehow decentralize again the pain point sourcing, that we could do projects across our footprint, and I think this was helping quite a lot. Maybe last point on this is we consciously decided at the beginning that we are outsourcing the scouting then for the right startup, and maybe also outsourcing some of the project management around piloting, because I said my main responsibility, and we were a team of 2 at that time, my main responsibility is to set up the environment and to somehow start to bring in pain points that needs to be solved.
Okay, so you can start with as small as a team of 2. I mean, I think for anybody kind of looking at, oh my gosh, how much do I need to sort of resource this? I guess it shows that you can achieve a lot with 2 people as long as you set it up. I had one kind of quick question though on just on that first point about setting up, persuading the different corporate functions that it was okay to sort of create lighter touch systems. How easy or difficult was that conversation? And did you have any tips for anybody for like how to make the case for that?
I mean, what Rosia said before about kind of the buy-in from top obviously helps if you have somehow the message that the organization tries to push innovation and that they see startups as an innovation driver. That's kind of an important point. I think what you have now these days enough is you have other corporates doing similar processes, and you can bring in experts there, like here from the panel or so, who could also explain how they did it. Often your counterparts in the organization believe more in people from outside of the organization than people inside the organization. These can be tips in that respect, maybe.
Well, maybe we'll cut that little clip out where Neha said in the beginning about that innovation is not a nice to have when you're now, and then maybe you can play that to to a board. That would be good. I'll come to you now, Neha, with a slightly different question, which is because there's also a lot of questions here. I'd love to get the other 2 to also weigh in on this, but I'll start with you, just on this measuring impact. What do you set up to make sure that you can kind of really show that something has meaningful impact? In all the different ways that might happen.
Yes. So there are few dimensions that you can take a look at whenever you're designing a POC. So we'll take a look at, for example, a financial impact. So what is the cost savings? What are the efficiency gains that we are targeting? Then we also look at adoption. Is the solution actually something that can scale up beyond the pilot or not? So this is the question that we start initially, even before we start the pilot, that if it's a success, will it scale? Will it be allowed to scale and serve at the Maersk operations level or not? We also look at the strategic alignment for sure, as I was already talking about, that are we actually solving the right problems? All the problems that we solve or all the opportunities that we tackle through the venture clienting model is business-led. We don't do anything which is not being supported or sponsored by a business function. So as I said, we just don't experiment for the sake of it. We are very purpose-driven when we say that we are doing venture clienting, we are experimenting. And one of the most important KPIs for me, honestly, is that will this pilot change how the business is operating today? And I think that is where the real value is created. So that is a question that we'll always ask. Like, is it just something good to have, or is it something that will become a need in the future, which we are already trying to serve through a pilot or through doing a POC?
Yeah. And then in terms of when you're sort of calculating whether, you're meeting those KPIs, are you getting that data's coming from the business unit that you're working with? So it's kind of validated. It's not just you now saying, oh, look, we're killing it here. It comes from the unit. And is it sort of a series of different things? So you have some that are the financial benefits and then some of the ones that are more strategic. And do you sort of like present on those or?
Yeah, so our operating model starts from a business application form, which is a very simple form. You talk about your problem statement, and then you talk about the impact, in which it is both criteria, which is quantifiable impact as well as qualitative impact. So, is it changing the way that you're working, or is it also impacting cost efficiency, productivity gains, and so on? And we always establish a baseline before we move into the project. And this we do in parallel with the startup that we have selected to go ahead with. So this is the baseline. What is that you are promising on that your solution will create? Will it create 35% cost energy savings at our warehouse? If yes, then we move ahead to it, and that is what we measure at the end of the pilot. That did it actually deliver on the 35% cost efficiency saving that the startup was promising on? That is how we define the success for the POC when we take the decisions on the scaling of it.
Okay, no, that's really clear. And I'll come back to you, Bengt, briefly, just because I know that in the preparation for this session, you were talking about how it's sort of switching your perspective a little bit in terms of thinking about whether something's really solving the problem for the business. And I thought you had some good thoughts on that. I just wonder whether just in terms of when you can see that something is going to have impact, like how do you think about measuring that impact?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the criteria for us to investigate further if it's a problem worthwhile to look into and to find startups is always about the scaling potential. I mean, if it's a problem which we think now this is really now a local topic just for, let's say, for Colombia, then probably it's not worthwhile to investigate too much further. But if we say, hey, it is now a problem in Colombia, but we can see how this is relevant for whole Latin America or for the whole of the group, then all of a sudden also smaller initiatives become quite valuable. And if you think about if you have a saving of maybe $1,000 per concrete plant, then that doesn't sound like a lot. But if it's then 1,000 concrete plants that you're having, then you add your 1 million, right? And if you look then on how organizations like ours try to reduce cost here, 50,000, here 100,000, then you should actually be quite grateful about those projects. And if you have to defend at the end of the year to the CFO why your team actually exists, and you have kind of also just 5 such small projects, you can say, well, that probably pays all of our salaries. So scaling for sure as a key element. And then I think our industry is not really very famous for being innovative and looking outside of what happens in our organization. I think what it opens up is just also a very explorative approach on how you can see where do maybe innovations bring new ideas, these business model innovations as well. And when we talk about the number of pilots, not every kind of startup conversation leads to a pilot, right? We have a multitude of startup conversations we are creating for our business units. And we have been measuring that at one point in time. And we said, hey, we have maybe 200 people or 200 experts of Holcim talking with startups through such a process, which again spark new ideas for them and which either verify the track that they're on, or maybe they say, oh, okay, maybe we should try something else. So that's also more qualitative, but not to underestimate.
Yeah, yeah. Now I wondered if we could turn briefly to something that again has come up in the questions is about this sort of interaction between CVC, so the kind of equity investment side with venture clienting and maybe coming to you, Rocio, because again, you guys started and really it was venture clienting was the first focus. And then you came to see that there was some scope and need to kind of invest. And often, when we have these discussions, about venture clienting versus venture investment. I mean, people are sort of saying, well, I don't know, do you miss out on some opportunities if you don't have a really big, venture investment program first? I'd just love to hear from you, how that kind of evolved, and where were the cases where you sort of thought, yes, no, the investment really is useful and necessary here as well.
Yeah, sure. So for us, investments are evaluated case by case. There's no that like this rule that if this happens, we're gonna invest. That doesn't work like that for us. So via PX Ventures, that's a part of us. We can invest in both VC funds, focused on construction, and as in strategic startups that we have already worked with, and we have already demonstrated the fit and the technology works for us. So we have like this dual way of work, if we may. Like we are executing projects and validating technologies, and if at one point we are like, okay, this one has a big impact or a strategic impact that we're seeing in the future, okay, maybe we can raise the hands and be like, please evaluate investment in this, and the other way around. Maybe some startup is like looking to fund any round and is like, okay, so we have been working quite some time. We need investment. Do you want to evaluate it? And we do. We have until now made like one startup investment directly, and we have already been investing in other funds. So it's like this way of keeping things going. But for us, I mean, not all projects end up in investment, and the majority doesn't end up in investment, but we also keep the conversation going. We still co-create with them. We still refer them to other clients, and we try to make them grow, even if we don't invest, so we can like keep things moving for both the startup and for us. So for us, investment is not equal to success. In some cases, we see like, okay, it's important, we evaluate that, but it's not a necessity.
Yeah. And the one that you did invest in, I mean, was it the feeling that, having a stake in them was, did it feel that, it just brought you a little closer, or that was, you were then able to maybe move the relationship into a different phase? I'm just wondering what that moment of investment kind of brings.
Yeah. So for us in that success case of investment, we were like in the middle of two pilot projects with the same startup, and we were looking at results. And we were like, okay, this can move the needle for that business unit on the way they do things. And at the same time, the timing like was right. They were like, okay, we're open to investment. And we sat together and talked about, okay, is this the right moment? Is this the right way to do? Because I mean, once you invest, I think you have like a more open conversation, and you're like more invested in making them grow as well. So I think it all depends on the timing and what you want to achieve via the investment. Sometimes they just want the money. Sometimes they want the contacts or or having multiple use cases validation with you. So I think it's a case by case scenario.
Yeah. And Neha, I'd like to put this to you, but in a slightly different way. I mean, I just wonder how you guys are thinking it at Maersk, because again, it's a very strong venture clienting. This is the one that's producing results. Is there any sense of like, well, are there some things that then you just have to accept that maybe you're not going to go down that route if you're not taking the venture investment? And how does that, how do you have that conversation internally?
Yeah, there is always that question that are you not missing out by not investing, right? I would say that for Maersk, the decision has always been very purpose-led. Even when we were doing CVC unit, we were investing for strategic benefits, not for the financial gains, right? And so the strategic value really comes first for us. Our priority is impact and adoption in the business, not the ownership. So if a startup is creating real impact for the business, that relationship is already really highly valuable for us. And investment, in my view, is not. It is just one of the ways to deepen that, but not the only one. So basically, we don't need to own a startup to create value from it. Venture clienting model itself is designed in a way that a mutual value creation happens in that particular operating model as well.
Yeah. Okay. So it, you know,
Can I just add
yeah, go
two
for it, Ben.
sentences because I mean, so great comments from the two colleagues. I think one thing on our investment hypothesis is we say test before you invest, right? This shows a little bit where the synergy would be between kind of venture clienting and then if it is successful and you think it makes sense to invest, that you only invest afterwards. And then maybe on what Nia just said, I mean, we are asking ourselves then very often if these investment proposals come to the investment committee, what is it that we gain on top of just the commercial relationship? And honestly, on paper, it's often nothing. At the same time, Rosia made a very nice statement. She said, You are personally invested, right? I mean, this invested thing, and sometimes this is needed to somehow that the organization says, oh, this is ours, and now they push the adoption. Maybe it's not really rational, but also a bit emotional, just some insights I had
So it
from our
can speed
organization.
up, it can speed up sort of adoption maybe internally in some cases. And but Bengt, what do you say to that you know, argument that some people make that okay, but then it means you're never really looking at Horizon 3 things because if you have to test before you invest, right, then the Horizon 3 stuff is not able to be tested right now because it's still in the lab or it's, you know, so, but does that worry you, or do you think that that would be a distraction anyway if you were looking at those?
No, I think, I mean, and we look at those, and it's maybe sometimes it can be limitations of venture clienting because, as you say, how do you test if they don't yet have a prototype? So in some cases, this means for us that it's more kind of testing on a lab scale level with innovation centers. But yes, you might need to reverse there a little bit. And these are then maybe also justifications where we say, okay, maybe we need to invest a little bit of money that they are ready to come to a level where we can also pilot them then really in a proper sense, but otherwise they would never get there.
Yeah. Okay, well, we only have a few minutes left, and I'm really sorry if we haven't got round to all the questions. We can, you know, come back to those in a different way, maybe. But one thing I would love to ask all the panel while I have you here, and Rocio already gave us an example of something that she changed or that they changed at Progresso X in terms of how they approached it. I'd like to put that same question to the other two. So maybe Neha, if you start this one off, you know, is there anything in the program that you know you kind of evolved, you know, pivoted a little bit because, you know, these would be great examples of maybe some pitfalls that other people can now avoid from hearing
Of
from you.
course. And in response to that, I'll use a very cliche line, which is that we have learned a lot from what doesn't work, right? So, a big one is that we ran too many disconnected pilots. It felt productive in the moment, like so many pilots are ongoing. There are 15 projects that we are working at one point in time. But what we saw is that if they're not tied to strategy, then they were not scaling. And over time, the organization then starts losing the trust in the process. So it starts to feel like experimentation just for the sake of it. So what we did was embed venture clienting directly into the business priority. So, and the key question that we always come back to for every pilot discussion is that is it linked to the strategic priority? So that has helped us in scaling the solutions really well, with over 60% of the pilots that have been scaling at Maersk today. We have also introduced impact thresholds. So whether that is the expected revenue update, upside that we're talking about, or the cost savings that we are targeting, there is some flexibility for strategically relevant topics as well. But overall, the bar is super clear. So the mindset shift has really been from let's experiment to let's experiment, but with intent.
So that was a great stat. So what was that? So did you say 65% then go on to scale, which is
Over 60, yes.
yeah. So, and that really comes from just having this higher bar for what you go ahead on, clearer focus. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It shows what you can
Absolutely.
do. What about you, Bengt? What have you sort of changed that sort of made a difference to how well the program was working?
I think one thing to keep in mind is that it's a portfolio thing in the end, what you're doing with these startup collaborations. And somehow keep in mind how your portfolio composition is. If you're really going all just with strategic Horizon 3 things, you will have difficulties to answer some questions. If you're all just bottom up topics, you might struggle with kind of explaining your strategic contributions, right? So I think this is something where we have shifted a little bit from left to right. But keep this in mind that Horizon 3 have maybe a much longer lead times until you can show the impact. On the other side, you can argue obviously to your strategic contributions. If the CFO asks you what is your bottom line impact, you're quite happy to have some Horizon 1 or 2 things which are just kind of helping to reduce cost and drive efficiency.
Okay. And I guess we kind of heard from you, Rocio. So I think we'll probably finish there because I noticed that we're at the hour. I feel like we could have talked about this for another hour without even touching the sides. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that for another day. But I want to say a big thank you first to our panel. And then I've just got a kind of couple of quick housekeeping messages about upcoming events. But so Rocio, Bengt, Neha, thank you so much for being with us today. If this wave of venture clienting continues to grow, I think this is going to be tremendously useful for everyone. So let me just quickly share. So thank you, panel. And then what we have coming up next. So for those who don't know Global Corporate Venturing, we run a series of events. So we have a regular webinar, but once a month, but also we have some in-person conferences. Our big European conference is coming up in June. We already have some great speakers. And I dare say that venture clienting will also be on the menu at that. So do check that out. Our next webinar, which will be on May 20th, will be looking at launching a CVC. So this is really one that we haven't run for a while, but it's for those who are looking to start from scratch, beginning those conversations with their company about, we'd like to have an investment function. How do you, how do you start that? How do you start to build the team? What are the first essential things that you need to do? So that's going to be a great hands-on one. And then other events. So apart from the GCV symposium, we have events then around the world. So we'll be in Brazil in September. In San Francisco, we have an LP GP summit where we help kind of make some of those introductions between GPs that are looking for corporate LPs and corporates who are looking to take positions. And then the Asia Congress in November. So thank you very much for joining us. If you have a moment afterwards to take our survey, we'd really appreciate it because we like to keep improving these webinars and making them as useful for everyone as possible. So if you have some time, we'd really appreciate it. I've been Maya Palmer. I'm the editor at GCV, and I've really enjoyed the session. And I hope you have too.